Hello everybody, and once again I'd like to go through some material about our wonderful world, and in this case I would like to start with talking about our oceans. Unfortunately, most of you have knowledge of the ocean based upon movies and things like this and don't have the actual background information, what's really happening through the ecosystem of our oceans. So we're going to take a look today at the oceans as a resource and how we use them. First of all, let's take a look at the overall trend of ocean use, and you'll see that as time goes on, more and more life is taken from the ocean, but you do see a slight difference in how we get that life from the ocean. And now what we're looking at through these trends are a difference between what we get through aquaculture, or the raising of ocean life, versus what we actually pull out of the ocean itself, which is going to be on the decline. And you're going to see why, because we've been fishing out the oceans to such a degree. So what we have is an increase in the overall production, but now more and more and more of that is actually coming from fish farms, as we call them, or aquaculture. Okay? So we're going to be taking a look at that as well, and looking at these trends to see what's happening. If you look at overall how we've been fishing our oceans, you will see some general concerns. In 1950, the areas that were overfished generally, according to scientists, were mostly in the Scandinavian countries and Europe and stuff like that. But as you work to today, you'll see that that area has grown dramatically off the coast of South America here, Peru, because of the cold ocean water and the great ecosystems happening right there. Still remains a problem in Northern Europe, but then look over here where these countries are so dependent on fish and fish populations, and also where you have lots and lots of people. So you can see that the oceans themselves are being fished out dramatically. Okay, so when you see the reds on there, those are extremely overfished areas. In fact, statistically, right now, a study came out in the Journal of Nature that has seen a dramatic decline in the number of large predatory fish caught over the past 50 years. Okay, and a more recent study found that 30% of our fisheries worldwide have seen a drop of 90% of the fish. All right, so 30% of all the fisheries, and fisheries are locations in the world where we actually go in the oceans to fish, have experienced a 90% decline in fish populations, and we call that a fishery collapse. All right, so when we talk about problems in the oceans, it's not all wonderful, okay, like you see a lot of times in the movies, but we're having major problems with just keeping the population of fish up. And the reason why is the oceans away from the shorelines are what we call a commons, right? And the commons is something that's owned by no one but shared by everyone. And the idea that in order for you to be economically to excel economically, all right, you do something called tragedy of the commons, where the first come, first serve, you go out, you get as much fish as you can, as quickly as you can, all right, and you're the ones that make the most money. And so we have this problem called tragedy of the commons. So what we're seeing is these fishery collapses all around the world. All right, we're just overfishing our oceans. So why? Well, one is technology has just gotten so big. These are now, we don't have boats, fishing boats, we now have factory ships where you harvest the fish, you pull the fish out of the ocean, you manage the whole entire production line all the way to putting them in a box and putting them in a freezer until you get back to shore. So these ships will stay out for 6 months at a time and package their entire set of fish that they catch. So when we look at how we fish the oceans, we're going to look at 4 different techniques, and I'm going to go through each of these so that you understand them. The trawling vessels, okay, the gill nets or drift nets, Seine nets, and a long line technique. Each one of them has their problems. All right, and we'll try to go through those one by one. So let's start with the trawling. Trawling is the typical idea of taking a large net and dragging it across the bottom of the ocean, all right, with the net wide open, and then scooping up as many fish as you possibly can. So the trawling nets are used a lot for like shrimp, okay, and flounder, a lot of your ground fish. The problem with trawling is that, I think you can see, it has tremendous ecosystem destruction because they drag along the bottom. These nets drag along the bottom and just destroy the bottom of the ocean. But they are very effective at pulling up a lot of fish at one time, as you can see here. Okay, you can pull up tons and tons of fish at a time. The second type is called longline fishing. Longline is the idea of just the regular hook and bait, but now instead of having one hook with bait on it, you're talking about thousands of hooks with baits on it. And those are then strung across the ocean, and then come back a day or two later and pull in whatever you catch. All right, one by one they come in. You also have this idea of a gill net or a drift net. These are nets that are put out in the middle of the night, and they stay out overnight. Fish can't see them. They hang down about 30 feet into the water, and they will catch the fish, and they'll get stuck. The gills will get stuck in the net, and then they will reel that in and pull out the fish. These are now mostly illegal across the world. We pretty much have decided to ban these because these are horribly destructive, because they catch anything that swims near them. Not just the fish you're going for, the targeted fish, but the many, many non-targeted fish, like sharks, like that, porpoises, even birds that'll dive down looking for food. Okay, so those drift nets are also a problem. We put out thousands of miles of them at a night, and the problem is just unbelievable to see the destruction. So hopefully we won't see as many of those. And then you have long line fishing, okay, which an albatross is calling, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, the next type is called a Seine net. All right, this is a very, very large net, as you see here. All right, that boat can go in a circle in the ocean. All right, put the net down, and then the reason why it's called a Seine net, because the purse idea is that you can take the bottom, you pull basically on a rope, and the bottom closes, trapping the fish, and then you can pull the fish in. Now, this technique is used for a very specific purpose. It has something to do with dolphins. What we found was a relationship, and that was when you see dolphins at the surface in large pods swimming across the ocean, you most likely are going to have a large number of tuna underneath them. So it was an easy way for us to find the tuna in large schools. So a large pod of dolphins means a large school of tuna underneath. So to catch the tuna, and this is the tuna that you eat with tuna fish and stuff like that, you would take the Seine net, take the dolphins, chase the dolphins, tire the dolphins, make the dolphins stop, make them go into something called a defensive posture, where they stop movement, and the females and the young go in the center, and the males swim in circles straight up and down around them to protect them, and the dumb tuna down below just swim in circles. So once you have those dolphins in that position, you then take your net, wrap it around the dolphins, all right, and close the bottom, trapping that tuna. And you're talking 3,000 tuna at one time without a problem. Then you pull the net in. The only problem is the dolphins are still in that net area. And when you pull the net in, you drag it. When you start pulling that net, you drag it underwater. Now, for fish, that's not a problem. But for dolphins, who are mammals, they breathe air. And what you have is a huge number of dolphins dying because they are caught in these nets. They can't get up to the surface to breathe, and they drown. So that's why you see those dolphin safe labels on tuna fish. because those are companies that are working to reduce the mortality rate of dolphins. It doesn't mean it's dolphin safe, but instead what it means is they're trying to reduce the mortality rate of dolphins. But this has gone on for years, and you're talking upwards of tens of millions of dolphins have been killed through the years to catch tuna. Now, that catching of a dolphin, the non-targeted species, is called bycatch. So here is a picture that you see on the screen of bycatch, and what you're looking at is a fishing industry trying to capture something, and the question is, what in this picture are they trying to capture? And if you look closely, you will find here and there you'll see a couple shrimp. This is actually from a shrimp boat. Everything, you see a few shrimp in different locations, everything else is bycatch. These are things that you don't want. All right, you normally just throw them back in the ocean dead, so that it's something that you catch inadvertently in your nets. And like I said before, the shrimp nets are usually the trawling vessels. So these are all types of creatures. That is a real serious problem. And the bycatch, the worst bycatch of all is the shrimp industry, with about 84% of what they catch bycatch. Overall, the fishing industry or fishing fleet has about 1/3 of their catch is bycatch. 2/3 is were targeted species, 1/3 is a non-targeted species. But the worst by far is the shrimp. And this is the shrimp industry, all right, trying to capture the shrimp with their trawling vessels, again creating that huge 84% bycatch. So if you look at bycatch overall, I mean, this is now, you're talking about the overall amount, all right, of bycatch. And what you see is trawling vessels are the biggest problem. Here's your shrimp, which I told you was the worst. Okay, but then you also have many, many thousands of other trawling vessels out there every night, which is causing a lot of bycatch. All right, you do get a little bit on longline. Okay, per seine is just basically your dolphins and the other different types, but mostly you're talking about, look at this chunk of bycatch basically from trawling, and most of that from shrimp. Just one species, shrimp. So bycatch is a real serious issue in our oceans, and it's one of the things that are destroying the populations of many species, which we shouldn't be destroying because they are not the ones we want to eat. So now we decided, okay, if we can't catch the fish are declining in the oceans, all right, we're going to try some solutions. Okay, one solution is here, and it's called aquaculture. Aquaculture is the idea of farming aquatic species like fish. Salmon is a famous one. Shellfish, okay, raising like scallops, mussels, and things like that. And you can even use aquaculture for seaweed and stuff. Okay, in this particular case, this is a salmon operation where you raise the salmon in captivity to breed them for eating later. So basically what you do is you set up a net around, you keep it mostly in the natural environment. So you would use a cove or a bay, something that's protected from the weather, set up nets inside and start raising the fish in large numbers in small areas. You can do it inland as well, but most of it's done along the shoreline, the coastline. And so going back to this graph, all right, you can see now the line for aquaculture rising very dramatically, okay, as you go up, to make up for the loss of naturally caught fish. So we're starting to see a lot of our fish in the grocery stores being what you call farm raised, meaning that they were done through a fish farm, through aquaculture. All right. Now, is this good, bad? Is it a solution? Well, we have to take a look at it and think about it. So let's think about aquaculture and whether or not it's a real solution. So fish farms, we'll look at their environmental consequences here. One, economically, it's obviously it's going to help out economically because you're able to raise a whole large number of fish in a very small area. But look at the ecological consequences, or we'll just say consequences. So, what are they? First of all, if you're going to raise a whole bunch of fish in a very small area, you're going to have a lot of problem with disease. So, you're going to have to include antibiotics in their food. So you end up with antibiotics in the fish themselves or in the whatever you're raising, because you can't have that many fish in such a small area without a very, very severe chance of spreading of disease and stuff. So what they'll do is they'll put antibiotics right in their fish food. Antibiotics then go into the fish, and whatever antibiotics do not stay within the fish go into the environment, in most cases in rivers, coves, bays, or whatever, or they stay in the fish and then we eat them. So we're eating meat from fish that's filled with antibiotics. Also, you could have a lot of fish. Think about it, a lot of fish in a very small area. The second problem is they're going to create a whole lot of waste. And where does that waste go? Well, we use the idea of the ocean being so large that the solution to pollution is dilution. You could take their waste and put it out into the ocean. But you're talking about a very, very large number of fish in a very, very small area. The concentration is so huge that the amount of waste is just gigantic. And what you're doing is you're adding all kinds of nutrients to that water. Not even to include things like bacteria in the feces as well. This is not just a nutrient problem, but you can also look at it as a bacterial problem as well. And so all of that is escaping into the natural environment. Viruses, who knows what's in there. Okay? And let's go with a third one, which is a huge problem, believe it or not, is the escape of these farm-raised species. Now that poses two problems. Number one, when they escape, they begin to compete for the same food sources as the native species. All right, but two, which very few people would ever even think about, when they escape the fish farms, then what happens is they are free to breed with the wild fish. So when you're talking about salmon, let's say, so salmon escape the salmon farms, gets into the wild, it breeds with the wild salmon. Why is that critical? Because the farm-raised salmon do not have the same instincts as the wild salmon. So a female may not, after being born from a farm-raised salmon, may not have the instinct to swim back upstream to the native breeding grounds of the small creeks way up in the mountains, and instead lays her eggs in the ocean. And when she lays her eggs in the ocean, they get eaten by other creatures. So the idea of escape is twofold. One is that they compete with the wild animals, and then also don't forget that you also can have that interbreeding, which can cause all kinds of problems. So fish farms, is it an answer? I don't know. It's a tough call. Many cases you want to avoid fish farm or farm-raised fish in the grocery stores because of the concerns of antibiotics and disease and stuff like that, and the problems that it creates. But when you have a population that's declining and you want to eat that particular type of fish, farm-raised may be the better choice. Best choice would be a species that is not endangered, populations are not declining dramatically, and are caught in the wild by techniques that do not create a lot of bycatch. So there's a couple things that happen that you should know to help us with our fisheries. One is in 1996. Whoops. That's definitely not right. In 1996, here we go, we had Congress passed the Sustainable Fisheries Act. Sustainable Fisheries Act. And the Sustainable Fisheries Act took the management off of the fisheries, off of the economic concerns, and made the managers do work more on the conservation side of it. All right, so that they were more aware, and by law they had to take into consideration species sustainability, okay, conservation and preservation of the species, okay, and then any critical marine habitat important for both commercial species and non-targeted species had to be protected until the populations recover. So according to the Sustainable Fisheries Act, you could actually take a section of our oceans and make them illegal to fish in until the populations have gotten beyond what we considered critical status. And also, way back in a great technique put together back in 1973 was the individual. So we use these today as well, especially in Alaska they use this. Individual transferable quotas. All right. The ITQs. All right. So before each salmon season, fishery managers could establish, based on their knowledge and using the Sustainable Fisheries Act, based on the number of species and whether you can sustain their population, they can establish a total allowable catch of all species. And then what they do is they sell or distribute these quotas to individual fishermen or fishing companies. So if you say you can catch 2,000 ton of cod, then you have 2,000 ton of cod quotas to be distributed among all the fishermen. And so the fishermen then would buy the quota, a certain amount, based on what they thought they could catch. And then if they caught less than that, they could sell those quotas to somebody else, or they could continue to try to catch. But most of the time they would only buy what they thought they could catch. And once all the quotas were sold out, nobody else is allowed to fish there. And this has made a significant difference in the salmon harvest in Alaska. It was on the decline from 1940 all the way through the 1970s until they started this individual transferable quotas. And ever since then, it has been on an increase. And in fact, it has remained stable since around 2000. But in 2000, it had rebounded to a population above what it ever has been since they've been measuring. So the individual transferable quotas seem to be a great way of trying to maintain a sustainable fishery. So we've got a lot of work to do with our oceans. Our populations are increasing. The number of people who are demanding fish are increasing, especially in other countries where their large part of their diet is based on fish. We have an awful lot of worries and an awful lot of things to consider when we talk about our fisheries. So hopefully this gave you a little perspective and a little bit of an idea of what's happening, so that you can go tell your friends the real truth about what's happening in our oceans.